With us now, the aforementioned Vivek Ramaswamy, of course, a candidate for president who's been surging in the polls, gets a lot of media attention. Vivek, very good to have you, and thank you. First off, on this border situation, you had talked about militarizing the border in the latest debate. You've had a very tough approach to this. The Mexicans sort of smart at that. They don't like the idea of U.S. soldiers there. How do you respond to that?
My response is the job of the U.S. president is to look after American citizens on American soil. And the right answer is we have a Swiss cheese of a southern border. The wall has proven, Neil, not to be enough. The cartels are building cartel-financed tunnels. Trucks are able to drive underneath the wall. So I think it is perfectly legally, morally, and ethically justified to use our own military to seal our own border. I'm also a pragmatist, Neil. There's also a pragmatic solution that nobody else is really talking about seriously that can solve a significant part of this problem now. What you have right now is not only not enough people at the border, that's half the problem. The other half of the problem is enough of the people in the U.S. government who are staffing the southern border aren't doing the right things. What does that mean? If somebody comes in and says they want to seek asylum, here's an easy change we can make. You have to provide proof of actually imminent danger. None of these people who are temporarily being granted so-called asylum actually meet that description, certainly almost none of them. With that simple change, we can take care of 75% of this crisis right now, the short-term crisis, out of the gates. So I combine that level of pragmatism with also going the distance to solve 100% of the problem by using the U.S. military to do it. And, Neil, I do think that's where I'm a little different than some of the other candidates. These aren't slogans for me. This is a deeply pragmatic approach, and the combination of those two things will solve our short-term southern border crisis. That's exactly how I'm going to lead.
You know, the backdrop for all of this, Vivek, as you know, is this imminent government shutdown. One of the measures they are going to try to take up and vote on is a clean bill that has no funding for the border for the time being. And another part of that is no funding for Ukraine. How do you feel about that?
Well, the first thing I want to say about the government shutdown debate broadly is I think it's a fake and artificial debate, if we're being really honest about it. What happens every time? The government comes back, all the employees get their back pay, and generally the government comes back bigger every time. Even the $1.5+ trillion that the so-called, I would say, fiscal hawk conservatives are proposing is still the largest federal budget that we will have ever had, right? And so I think that right answer has to be thinking on the timescales of history. I actually applaud the Republicans who are holding a firm line on this. We have to drive deep cuts. So rather than talking about a fake shutdown debate, I'd actually prefer proposing a real government shutdown of the administrative state, of those three-letter agencies in Washington, D.C., the people who we never elected to run the government, who are the ones who are actually running the government. 75% headcount reduction in the number of federal bureaucrats, rescind a majority of those unconstitutional federal regulations. And I think that unlocks the economy, Neil. That also unlocks prosperity in this country. Zero-based budgeting. That's what I'm bringing to Washington, D.C. as the president. Start with zero as the baseline and then ask exactly what's necessary, rather than starting with last year as the assumed baseline. That'll take a CEO in the White House. There isn't a state in this union that does it today. The federal government's never done it. That's exactly how I will run the federal government. And that's exactly how we address our national debt while also doing it in a sane manner. And I think that's how I'm going to lead as the next president.
All right. Well, you're a savvy businessman, and you're right. Many Fortune 500 companies, most private companies, publicly owned or not, are of that mindset. They do use such budgeting. But the panic that would ensue from a lot of people I talk to, Vivek, is such that you're almost asking for a further downgrade in U.S. debt, that it will look like bedlam, and that you're naive. What do you say?
Well, look, I respect different points of view, but I strongly disagree with this one. The real crisis is right now the status quo of a $33 trillion and ballooning national debt against the backdrop of stagnant economic growth. So I've got very pragmatic solutions for how to address this. Drill, frack, burn coal, embrace nuclear energy, stop using taxpayer money to pay people more money to stay at home than to go to work. That already delivers economic growth while paying down some of that debt. Stabilize the dollar, rescind these unconstitutional federal regulations that shackle the U.S. economy. That delivers economic growth. Do that against the backdrop of zero-based budgeting. And that shouldn't result, that doesn't make any sense, Neil, that should result in credit downgrades, that it looks like panic. people aren't worried about the optics here. People are correctly
I think
worried
what they're
about the
responding
substance.
to, Vivek, I
the fact that we have a
apologize.
massive national debt.
I'm sorry I wasn't clear on that. They, hiring, we're all of a sudden announcing you're firing 3/4 of federal workers. You're doing this major change here with no guarantee that that would cast muster in the House or the Senate. That would invite just confusion and lead to, a bond market tumult, the world over. That's what they're saying. But go ahead.
So, in fairness, then, let me respond to that, which is, first of all, I've said 75% headcount reduction by the end of my first term. We're going to be very pragmatic about this. Reorganizing, take the FBI, 15,000 of the 35,000 who work there. We'll still have jobs, but it won't be at the FBI. It'll be at the U.S. Marshals or the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, where they have much greater specialization. So the way we're doing this, Neil, is we've offered unprecedented detail. We will at once improve effectiveness while taking out the deadweight cost and the deadweight bureaucracy. And I do think that is what's going to be required if we really want to drive change. The thing I think is more frightening than anything is the trajectory we're on now. That's going to require a leader who's going to act with conviction. Right. And I will note that I don't need Congress to implement those changes. The Constitution gives the U.S. president the power to run the executive branch of government. And as the nation's next chief executive, I will.
All right. While I still have you here, you got quite a bit of a hullabaloo right at the debate when you spoke of the fact that you were on TikTok now. You had once referred to it as digital fentanyl over fears of China using this to spy on us, et cetera. Nikki Haley, among others, said it's a very dangerous setup there. And your support for it, while I understand it was to reach out to younger voters, I get that, that you're naive there, too, and just sending a dangerous signal and a green light to China to continue spying on us. What do you say?
So my concerns remain, Neil. To be crystal clear, I want to declare economic independence from China. I think kids under the age of 16 should not be using addictive social media. We're not going to change any of that, though, until we win elections. And the Republican Party has talked a big game about reaching young voters. There's exactly one leader in this party who's actually doing it, and that's me. And I do think it's a little hypocritical for the other candidates who are virtue signaling and criticizing me on stage, even as their own kids, adult children, are on TikTok today. So I think we have to recognize the reality of where young voters are. We have to meet them there. I'm actually inspiring young voters across this country. They're coming along in droves, supporting me in my campaign. That's what's going to propel us to the White House. That's what's going to propel us to success in reviving our national soul. And then that's how we're going to be able to make those changes.
But young
to make sure that
voters,
young kids
Vivek,
across this country are not using social media.
But young voters are on other social media. TikTok is among them. So why do something like that, have a 180 reversal on a position you were quite vehement about?
I don't have a reversal. Yes, so I don't have a 180 reversal. My position remains young people should not be using addictive algorithmic social media beneath the age of 16, and we need economic independence from China. But my point, Neil, is we're only ever going to drive those changes if we're actually winning elections and reaching young voters. The Democrats are 3-1 beating Republicans amongst young voters.
But you just said
and yes,
before
Democrats
you
are
called
all
it
over
digital
TikTok.
fentanyl, that's where there's the change here. So if you still subscribe to that,
I regret that we're where we are as a system.
But if you still subscribe to that view, why the heck would you say, nevertheless, I'm going to reach young people there because on this digital fentanyl, that's what they're drawn to. They like it. So I might as well endorse it.
I'll give you an analogy, Neil.
Sure.
I've also been a vocal critic of energy regulations in this country, but I still use electricity and water because that's what's going to be required in order to get to a place to drive that change. So we have a broken system. I mean, we have super PACs that I think have corrupted both the Republican and Democrat Party. But the reality is we have a broken system and a broken game. We have to play within the system we have to win. That's how we actually drive change. And you mark my words, a year from now, many Republicans are going to be doing the same thing because their Democrat competitors are eating our lunch and cleaning our clock with young people. Most of those Democrats doing really well, reaching those young voters through social media, including TikTok. So do I think that young people should be using social media? No, not addictive social media. But we're not going to change that until we win. And I'm going to be the one who leads us there by reaching that next generation while staying consistent on our principles for what exactly we will accomplish when we get there.
You know, finally, Donald Trump had looked at this debate. His popularity's gone up, missing 2 debates now. He wasn't impressed with the debate for some reason, but he has said that he wasn't impressed with any of you guys as potential running mates by saying he might look elsewhere. What did you think of that?
I wasn't particularly paying attention to that comment, but I've said very clearly I'm in this to run for U.S. president. And the reason I have consistently acknowledged that Donald Trump is an excellent president is that's the right thing to do. He kept us out of wars, and at the same time, our economy grew. But I'm in this race, Neil, to take our America First movement to the next level. America First doesn't belong to Trump or to me. It belongs to the people of this country. And when we're guided by that, good things are going to happen. And I think that that's how we're going to lead this nation forward. And I believe it will take somebody from a different generation whose best days in life are still ahead to see a country whose best days are still ahead of itself. And that's why I think we're going to be successful.
Vivek, always good catching up with you. Thank you very much. Vivek Ramaswamy, a presidential candidate to lead this country. We'll keep an eye on him.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brian Kilmeade. I want you to do me a favor. I want you to click to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page. This is the only way that I know for sure that you're not going to miss any great commentary, any great news bites, any great interviews coming your way on Fox. You can get it all here on YouTube. So subscribe right now.